Um, Dan, maybe mute. Thank you. So just a reminder that the names that are used for the books are quite different from English to Hebrew. In English, it's the kind of the theme of the book. In Hebrew, it's pretty much the first significant word, kind of the same way it's done with the Parsha. So Shemot, names, is really just the first significant word, although a lot of people read into it all kinds of other meanings. And that's the fun of, Midrash and kind of exploring. But in terms of the simple meaning of the word, it's just simply the first significant word. The Parsha starts off with the names of the people who went down into Egypt. Just a fun quote I found, which you can see here. And this sort of, I think, really sums up the idea of the continuation of the Jewish nation, right? And so we're starting here in the book of Shemot, and to a large degree, there's a pretty smooth continuation. Obviously, there's significant changes and all of that, but this morning I saw an article about them, archaeologists digging up new things. These constant articles, in the Jerusalem Post and things about them. Anyway, okay. So a little more introduction. The nation of Israel, the Jewish nation, was formed in the crucible of the Egyptian exile through the leadership of Moses around the years 1391 to 1271 BCE. Before that, until around 1300 BCE, they were a large family, clan, tribe, and it wasn't a nation. After that time, they slowly evolved into a nation with its own land, as well as religion and customs. It's a side thought that I'm kind of developing here, so it's a little bit half-baked. The tension between ethnicity of Judaism and the religion starts pretty early on, as some of the early founders married outside the clan. Two notable examples are Judah, who first married a Canaanite and then married, it doesn't explicitly say that he married Tamar, but that's certainly the implication. And Tamar may have been a Canaanite as well. And then Moses marries a Midianite, and then we also see mention that he's married to a Cushite, which is either the same woman or a second wife. And this continued with the Erev Rav, the mixed multitudes that joined the Israelites when they left Egypt, and on and on. Right, and so this idea that it's all about blood and the tribalism is really, certainly a false dichotomy if you look at it as solely that. The Israelites begin to rule in the land under the leadership of Joshua around the year 1250 BCE. So Joshua is the heir, if you will, the next leader after Moses. The land was later led by kings such as Saul, David, and Solomon. King David started his rule in Hebron, but then made Jerusalem the capital of the nation. King Solomon built the first temple. Jewish rule came to an abrupt end in 587 BCE when the Babylonians captured Jerusalem and destroyed the temple. But there were still lots of Jews in Israel. The Romans, led by Titus, destroyed the second temple in exile and dispersed most of the Jews in the year 70 CE. Right? And then that starts the exile to where we are today. While the patriarchs were chosen to receive the divine covenant, the Brit, it was only after the Exodus and the Sinai that God gave them the Torah through Moses, which gave the details of how to keep the covenant. Considering Moses' role, it makes sense that he would have a dramatic entrance into the world. The commentators embellish the story to make it even more notable and dramatic. So we're going to focus today on Moshe Rabbeinu and Moses and some of the the actual text and the medrash. So Shemot Bet, Vayelech ish mi Beit Levi, Vayikach et bat Levi. A certain man, notice it doesn't mention the name, which is kind of ironic when the name of the whole book is names, right? And all the other names are mentioned, even almost seemingly unnecessarily, because we already know who a lot of them are. But over here, a certain man from the tribe of Levi, from the house of Levi, marries a certain woman from the Levi. Right? So why does it not mention it? Different theories. One theory I saw, which was interesting, is because this man was marrying his aunt, his father's sister. So that's a little bit problematic. So we only find out about it later. Anyway, moving along, the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw how beautiful he was, she hid him for 3 months. Right now, are we talking about physical beauty, or are we talking about something else? So we'll go into that a little bit later. When she could hide him no longer, she got a wicker basket for him and caulked it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child into it and placed it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. And his sister stationed herself at a distance to learn what would befall him. Right, so one of the interesting things the commentators also point out is, you know, it says she saw that he was beautiful, and that's why she hid him. I mean, what mother wouldn't try to hide their baby to try to protect them, you know? The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the Nile. While her maidens walked along the Nile, she spied the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to fetch it. When she opened it, she saw that it was a child, a boy crying. She took pity on it and said, "This must be a Hebrew child." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, so she comes running, right, because she's been watching, "Shall I go and get you a Hebrew nurse to suckle a child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter answered, "Yes." So the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will pay you wages." So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, who made him her son. So the simple reading of this is that actually that the child grew up basically that Moses grew up in his home with his mother and his sister, and that later she brought him to the daughter of Pharaoh. Although it's often presented as that Moses grew up in the palace with Pharaoh. She named him Moses, explaining, "I drew him out of the water." So some commentators point out that Moshe is a Hebrew word. So why would an Egyptian woman have named a baby with a Hebrew name? It's certainly an interesting thing to consider. Maybe she was knowledgeable in Hebrew, knew that it was a Hebrew child, and felt that that was the right thing to do. Yeah, so that, and there was another thought that just slipped my head.
Rabbi, quick question. Would he have been
Sure.
circumcised at that point? Would he have had a bris?
Fascinating question. The reason I say that is
That she would have known he was Jewish.
I don't know. I don't remember if I included this medrash, but I saw this in a couple of different places where it says that certain people were actually born circumcised. That they were born, talk about nature and nurture, that certain people were born at such a level that they didn't need to be circumcised, and Moses is included in that list. So based on that medrash, he would have already been circumcised, and the idea being that actually we would all have been born without a foreskin, but it was only after the sin, the Garden of Eden and all of that that the foreskin came on, and therefore it's sort of a foreign thing to be removed. Sometime after that, when Moses had grown up, he went out to his kinfolk and witnessed a Hebrew, one of his kinsmen. And witnessed their labors. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinsmen. He turned this way and that, and seeing no one about, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. When he went out the next day, he found two Hebrews fighting, so he said to the offender, "Why do you strike your fellow?" He retorted, "Who made you chief and ruler over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Moses was frightened and thought the matter is known and he's in trouble. I'm not going to read the whole parsha, I promise. We'll get into the end here. When Pharaoh learned of the matter, he sought to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh. He arrived in the land of Midian and sat down beside a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. They came to draw water and filled the throats to water their father's flock. But shepherds came and drove them off. Moses rose to their defense, Moses the hero, and he watered their flock. When they returned to their father Reuel, who will later come to know as Jethro, he said, "How is it that you have come back so soon today?" So I guess this was a daily practice where the shepherds would give him a hard time. They answered, "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." He said to his daughters, Where is he then? Why did you leave the man? Ask him to break bread." Moses consented to stay with the man, and he gave Moses' daughter Zipporah as wife. She bore a son, whom he named Gershom. For he said, "I've been a stranger," like ger is a stranger, it's also the word used for convert, but it means stranger. Sham, over there, Gershom. "I've been a stranger in a foreign land." A long time after that, the king of Egypt died. So this is a common theme. The king of Egypt dies, and then there's a transition. The Israelites were groaning under the bondage and cried out, and their cry for help from the bondage rose up to God. God heard their moaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God looked upon the Israelites, and God took notice of them. All right, so let's go straight to the Ramban. I always feel the need to point out that this is not the Rambam. That ends with an M. "And when she saw him that he was good, she hid him." Jack, can you... Thank you. She hid him for 3 months. All women love their children, whether they are beautiful or not. And certainly all the Jewish mothers in Egypt hid their children as long as they could. Consequently, why does the verse need to emphasize that she saw he was good? The explanation is that she saw an unusual goodness about him, and the thought entered her mind that a miracle would occur. We're getting a little bit of buzzing. I'm not sure why. It's probably me because everybody else is muted. All right, I'm sorry. Oh, disappeared. Miraculous. Okay. Consequently, why does the verse need to emphasize that she saw he was good? The explanation is that she saw an unusual goodness about him, and the thought entered her mind that a miracle would occur whereby he would be saved. Therefore, she took to heart and began to think of ways to save him. When she saw she could not hide him any longer, she thought of a new strategy and made him a wicker basket. And like I mentioned in the past, it's interesting. When we were shopping for a bassinet for Zahava, we came across some bassinets that are known as Moses baskets. So this theme is translated into modern design. When she saw she could not hide him any longer, she thought of a new strategy. Okay. His sister stationed herself at a distance, so she would not be discovered, to know what would be done with him. All this supports the view of our sages, who said that the entire house became filled with light upon his birth. All right, so this is another idea of saying that this is how she knew that something special was happening, and Moses was such a significant person that, you know, just like the other medrash I mentioned earlier that said that he was already born circumcised, he also, just his entrance into the world was physically different, and it lit up the whole room. And we'll see that mentioned from the Talmud a little later. It also lends support to their statement that Miriam had prophesied that her mother would give birth to the Savior of the people of Israel. All right, Chizkuni, who you're going to hear a lot of today, he offers a lot of good commentary on this section. And when she saw, realized that he was good, ki tov. So what does it mean? Seeing that Moses was born to his mother after a pregnancy that had lasted only 6 months. Now, isn't that interesting? It's not clear exactly where he gets this idea from, what text he's basing it on, or if it's just something that he learned, you know, he was taught growing up. But that Moses was a preemie. 6 months. She noted when examining the baby in detail that all of Moses' fingernails and toenails were fully developed, just like those of a baby after 9 months pregnancy. She realized that he was healthy and would survive the critical months ahead of him. She had no problem hiding him for 3 months, as she had not been due to give birth during that period. When she was asked about the baby she had born by her neighbors, she would say that she had already complied with the king's decree and had thrown him into the Nile. So it's a little bit hard to understand exactly what he's saying here. He's sort of giving the implication that because it was a preemie, people would not have expected him to be born, but then it suggests that, you know, neighbors were asking, and she said she already did it. I don't know if the expectation, yeah, I'm not really sure. A different interpretation views the word tov as a hint that Moses had been born without a foreskin. Oh, here it is. The custom of reciting the line Hodu Ladonai ki tov, praise the Lord for he is good, is recited during the circumcision ceremony as a reminder that Moses did not need to be circumcised. Right, and that is mentioned by the Mohel during a circumcision, during a bris. All right, so the Talmud in Sota that we mentioned earlier. The verse states, with regard to the birth of Moses, and the woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw him that he was goodly, tov, she hid him 3 months. It is taught in a brisa that Reb Meir says, tov is his. Oh, tov is Moses' real name. And it's interesting because there are other midrashim that also give Moses other names. So going back to that theme of names, and this narrative kind of fits in with the idea, if he was a preemie, he's born for 3 months before, or even if he's not a preemie, but it clearly says that she hid him for 3 months. Wouldn't she have already given him a name? Wouldn't have his parents already given him a name? You know, the daughter of Pharaoh comes along 3 months later and gives him a name, but it would make sense that he would already have had a name. And so Reb Meir is suggesting that the name was Tov. And then Rabbi Yehuda says his name was Tovia, which I like because that's one of my nephew's names. Tovia would be, oh, let's see, maybe he explains it himself. So Yah is like God. So like God is good. Rabbi Nehemiah says they said he was good because they saw he was fit for prophecy. Right? How did they see that? We don't know. Maybe the light in the room. Others say they said he was good because he was born when he was already circumcised. So we mentioned that already. And the rabbis say at the time when Moses was born, the entire house was filled with light, as it is written here. And when she saw him, that he was a goodly child. And it is written there in another place in Genesis, and God saw the light, that it was good. So we have Tov here and we have Tov there. Ki Tov, actually. And so we learn from it. Okay. So Moses' first act in this formation of the eventual leader of the Israelites is stopping a fight. So, you know, if you want to stop a fight, you know, you shout at people, maybe you yank them away. You don't necessarily kill them. Killing the aggressor seems like a pretty drastic action. And especially now, you know, with the Black Lives Matter movement and all of that, and when people are really looking at, and, you know, and the scrutiny in Israel, as well as, you know, is it proportionate? Is it an appropriate response, or is it overreacting, right? Did Moses overreact over here?
Or Rabbi, was the killing possibly accidental? He just meant to break up the fight and somehow or other.
So I didn't include the text here. Let me include the text, and that will probably help it a little. Give me a second. Oh yeah, I did include it. When the child grew up, hold on. Sometime after that, when Moses had grown up, he went out to his kinsfolk and witnessed their labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinsmen. He turned this way and that, and seeing no one about, he struck down the Egyptian. Right? He didn't have to look this way and that. Well, I guess maybe he did, because, you know, the Egyptians were in power, and so yeah, I mean, I can work with that. It's possible that he didn't intend to kill him. But the Chizkuni seems to be uncomfortable with the idea that he killed him just because they were fighting. So he says he struck the Egyptian dead. He found that he had committed a capital offense according to the 7 laws that all of mankind must obey. What capital offense was he doing? They were having a fight. His offense was that he had raped someone else's wife. Basically, I think what he's implying is that that's what this fight was about. And the Torah had forbidden this when writing in Genesis 2:24, "V'davak v'ishta," he should cleave to his wife, and not to the wife of another man. According to Tosfot, Kedushin 21, there was no need to warn the Egyptian beforehand in order to make him culpable. Where am I? For the death penalty, as we derive from Genesis, you're going to die on account of the woman, and Avimelech had not first received warning. Right, so the implication here is that he did mean to kill him. And let's see. And I think, let me see, I think this Gemara actually expands on it and learns that if a Gentile is beating up a Jew, you actually are allowed to kill him. Let me see if that's where this one is. Sanhedrin 58b says the Babylonian Talmud, a Gentile who struck a Jew is liable to receive the death penalty, as it is stated when Moses saw an Egyptian striking a Hebrew, and he turned this way and that way, right? So that implies that not only was it intentional, it's actually a model for us. Right? A little bit problematic, but certainly for Jews who believe, that we need to defend ourselves, they often use this text as a way of saying, if people are coming for us, we have a right to defend ourselves. We don't need to stand there and wait and only pray. We can.
Rabbi Shelley, it may be that Moses was the first practitioner of Krav Maga.
Yes. It doesn't tell us specifically what his moves were. But that's certainly got potential. So moving along, so Moses receives a prophetic vision. I was thinking about this for those of you that were on the class about the hero's journey, the different stages of the hero's journey. And one of them is the calling. And this is kind of like the calling. It's interesting. I learned recently that Joseph Campbell wrote the book about the hero's journey during a pandemic. And he was quarantined. And he was bored out of his mind. And so he was reading all these stories. And that's where he wrote the book. We had a family Zoom yesterday. We found a sweet spot between England and Australia and the US around 6:30 at night. So my sister in London, they're really in lockdown now.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to hear, she's looking for suggestions. She said she's already bored. She learned how to knit and now she's bored of knitting. It's a Hava benefit. She got a blanket and 2 hats out of it.
So he has family in London?
Yeah, as far as in London.
Yeah. All right. So Moses' prophetic vision, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire out of a bush. He gazed, and there was a bush all aflame, yet the bush was not consumed. Right? This is a famous image. So, before with the fight with the Egyptian, he was just going on instinct. He was like, "This is not right. These are my people are being abused, and I'm going to stop it." Now he's getting divine. This is not natural. If a bush is on fire, it's supposed to burn, and then there's an angel inside, and what's up with that? So the Sepharno, another commentator that is often quoted, it kept burning. This phenomenon indicated the prophetic nature of the experience. Unless the angel had been within the bush, this could not have happened as something natural. The fire, I'm not sure if this is a perfect translation here. The fire Moses saw burning enveloped the angel. The implied message was that the righteous members of the Jewish people, who are themselves angels of God, i.e. his messengers on earth, and who are surrounded by the Egyptian nations, who treated them as burning thistles or less, would themselves become subject to this fire when enduring the 10 plagues, but would remain unharmed by all those plagues. This is what Moses was taught when he saw it was not consumed by the flames which kept burning. The level of Moses' prophecy at that time was not yet at the level it would be later on. The very fact that the Torah describes Moses as being even afraid to look at the spectacle before his eyes is proof of this. From the day the Torah was given, as the Torah testifies in Numbers 12:8, later on, God extended the power of Moses' prophetic vision so that he showed him a visual image of God. The entire Jewish people, right? So this is the idea of the formation, the building up. Moses wasn't, Samuel was basically groomed to be a prophet. He was raised in the temple by the high priest, and Moses wasn't groomed for that. He was just, trying to survive. God extended the power of Moses' prophetic vision so that he showed him a visual image. Okay, the entire Jewish people had a brief revelation of God's glory at Mount Sinai only. Their power of endurance was so limited, even at that time, that the Torah reports them as saying that they could not even endure hearing the voice of the Lord, not to speak of enduring a visual image. I was talking to a friend of mine who's been experimenting with ayahuasca. And it's, the Native American, what's the word? Hallucinogenic, I guess. And it's supposed to have healing powers and all of that. And I was kind of thinking about it, in terms of these experiences. And, normally our consciousness blocks out certain things. It doesn't allow us to see certain things that are just too unpleasant or too difficult for us to handle. And, whether it's an hallucinogenic or some of these other things kind of go past that barrier. And so in prophecy, they're able to see what we're not normally able to see. And even at Sinai, when we were shown a little bit more, we couldn't handle it, is the message that I get from this. All right. Chizkuni on 3, 2, 1. In the heart of the fire, God wanted Moses to get used to such a phenomenon so that when the time came for the revelation at Mount Sinai, he would not become frightened by either it or the lightning. So this was part of his grooming as he becomes a prophet. On a simple level, I think it's the preparing him to take on what seems like an impossible task, to basically confront the king and tell him, let my people go. And so by him seeing God's power in the supernatural, hopefully it would give him more confidence. But clearly it wasn't enough, because we see other examples where God keeps showing him supernatural things. For example, with the snake, and then sticking his hand into his pocket and becoming leprosy, and then not. All right, Chizkuni, but the bush was not being consumed by the fire. This was a symbol for both Israel and the Egyptians. The Israelites' enemy, Egypt, is portrayed as, so this is kind of a similar idea that we saw before from the Sforna. The Israelites' enemy, Egypt, is portrayed as an all-consuming fire, while his prey, Israel, is supposed to be represented by the bush that refuses to be consumed by the fire. Right, and that's kind of an analogy for the Jews in general, that despite, and that's in part why I brought that quote in the beginning. For those of you that missed it, I'll just pull it up again. And maybe somebody can pronounce this guy's last name. I always feel like I get it wrong. Is it Krauthammer?
Krauthammer, yeah.
Krauthammer.
Yeah.
Who passed away not too long ago, right? And this sort of idea of the continuation of the Jewish nation. So, despite the incredible attempts to annihilate us, we've survived longer than, these huge empires. All right. Let's see, where were we? Stage, okay. So continuing along, we did that. Okay, so the same God who made a covenant with your ancestors. So Moses is standing by the burning bush. God says, take your shoes off, you're on holy ground. And God adds in there a couple of times. This is just one of them. I am. He said, the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. And, the repeating this idea that I am the God of the, in this case, patriarchs, I see as saying, therefore, the same covenant, the same deal, the same promises that I made to them apply to you. And so kind of giving him the confidence that they're going to, there's going to be a good outcome here, even though it's pretty bleak right now. Chizkone, I am the God of your father. By saying these words, God revealed to Moses that his father had already died. This is an interesting medrash. For we have a tradition that God does not associate his holy name to living persons, as he does not know if they will abandon him before they die. The rule is, Hein b'kdoshim lo yamin, he does not display trust even in his holy ones until they have departed life on this earth. The reason why God decided to tell Moses in this way that his father Amram, who had been the leader of the Jewish people in Egypt, would not be used by Moses as an excuse to decline his appointment to his father as his father's successor. So basically, it's saying that Amram was actually the leader of the Jews before Moses, and Moses would have said, "Why don't you just leave it to my father? Why are you dumping this on me? I don't want to upstart or upstand my father." So the idea being that he was basically being told that his father died. If Moses was reluctant to accept the appointment out of respect for his older brother, how much more would he decline out of respect for his father?
Where did this older brother come from?
Later, Moses, I have my brother Aaron, who's older. Why me? Basically, Moses tried everything he could to get out of this role.
I'm just curious if they were supposed to have thrown the children into the Nile. How
did he survive? That's a good question. It is a good question. I'm not sure where it's addressed. Anybody have any insight on that one?
No.
Maybe she figured if the strategy.
Could have been before the decree.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I think too.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
Decree. Okay. I'll accept that.
Okay.
Rabbi, I have a question
Go ahead.
There's a part that seems a little disturbing, that God all of a sudden remembered his covenant after he heard the groaning. Where was he for all those years? It's like, oh yeah, there you are. Let me help you now. It was like he's sort of forgotten about them for 400 years, whatever it was. So what happened at that time?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I've always struggled with this word remembering. We have it in the high holidays. It's a very hard word to understand when the Jewish theology is generally that God's all knowing, all present everywhere. What's this remembering? And it seems to have some other kind of meaning that that maybe the time was up, that whatever had to happen, this idea that we don't grow unless we're squeezed a little. People, when they're comfortable and their life is going well, generally don't change. They don't grow. There's, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? And sometimes people need to go through some form of discomfort or suffering in order to change. And I think the idea being that this going down into Egypt, what was necessary for them to form into a cohesive nation. So it's sort of a necessary evil, if you will. But God finally saying, okay, it's enough. I know that's not a super satisfactory answer, And my mind was kind of going sort of in the same direction, as you can see here. The next thing God says is, God said to Moses, so Moses asks God, when they ask, who, you know, what do we call you? So God says, Eya Asher Eya, which is interesting because I don't know if there's any other place in the Hebrew Bible that God is presented in that way. You know, it's usually, you know, Adonai or Elohim or Shaddai. But this one is, you know, I generally translated, I am who I am, or something like that. And then an interesting Rashi on it says, what does it mean? Eya Asher Eya, I am that I am. I will be with them in this sorrow. You know, and this really kind of sounds like the Kushner explanation. I'm not talking about Jared. Does everybody know what I'm talking about? The Kushner, the Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People book?
Rabbi Kushner.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're not familiar with it, I think it's a really important read, whether you agree with him or not, but certainly to just to get the wheels turning on a really, really difficult issue. So I will be with them in the subjugation they will suffer at the hands of other kingdoms. So basically, God's saying is that I accompany you, I'm with you in your suffering, which, you know, for some could be a comfort, for others it can be just, you know, pushing the question even more. If you're with me, then why don't you help me? All right. Whereupon Moses said to him, Lord of the universe, why should I mention to them other sorrows? They have enough with this sorrow. God replied to him, you have spoken rightly, and therefore just say, Eya sent me, not Eya, Asher Eya, but Eya sent me. I am. You know, I look at this name of God as basically the one that says that there are some things that we can't understand. In other words, it's God who's sending, and this is beyond human comprehension.
Rabbi, just a question.
Yeah.
Is a more careful translation, I will be who I will be?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not really sure where that one comes from. That's probably I'm sure there are papers written just on that.
Yeah.
Whether that's part of the Septuagint, you know, translation, or King James, or where it comes from. All right. And then the last verse I brought, I probably had something in mind that I got interrupted from. I had to bring Zahava over to a play date. All right, Exodus 3:16. Go and assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers. Yeah, so this thing again, bringing this this idea of the God, you know, before it's the Eya Asher Eya, but this is the more common one, the God of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And, you know, this is also, you know, I was reading this really interesting article on the idea of chosenness, which is, you know, in some ways the bane of our existence, in other ways a motivator. And the idea being that, you know, back then, every nation, every tribe, clan, whatever you want to call it, had their own god. There was no such thing as conversion. If you were part of this group, then this was your god. You know, and the way it's kind of said sometimes is the god of, you know, so this person is associated with that god, or this group, or this family. That's a whole other topic. Any other questions, comments, concerns, hopes, jokes, desires? All right. Well, it's a pleasure as always. I appreciate you joining us. What do we have coming up this week?
We'll see you tomorrow at 7:30. Well, we have tomorrow's services at 7:30.
Right.
We have a board meeting at
Wednesday.
Wednesday. At 7:30. I think it's 7:30.
Hebrew school is
Some
still-
behind the scenes work.
I said Hebrew
We
school is
have to
still-
get what?
Hebrew school is
I was saying we have to
having
Go ahead,
trouble.
one more time. Ruth, what was that?
I was saying Hebrew school is still virtual, so we're still having Friday night services this week.
We are, but we're starting, even with it continuing virtual, with all likelihood will be through January. Although that's not definitive, but that's the look. That's the way it's going. Rob is planning for the Saturday afterwards, after
16th.
Shabbos rather, Saturday after next week, which is what, the 17th, 18th, to have the Abdullah service and some other things. But that's not going to affect our Friday evening service.
No.
Right, so I guess that's a good point to bring out. We'll still have our Kabbalah Shabbat
Yeah.
Friday at 6:30. Yeah. Yeah.
Very good.
So, and I'm planning the annual meeting, so I'll keep everybody apprised of that. But what I started to say is that we have some behind the scenes work going on. Particularly, we have to get the statements out. So there's work that we're pursuing. We also have to look at planning for the move out of the Hebrew school building to the newly renovated offices, but that's just something to discuss. We're not going to do anything until, the pandemic eases off a bit.
All right,
That's
let me
really
know
it.
if I need to come
Anybody?
in there to move some of my stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, think about where you want your stuff to go, because you still have a lot of toys up there, as I recall.
Yeah, we got to get them. She might be old enough to use them now. All right, guys.
Well, maybe we could clear off an area in the kitchen. So we'll work on it.
Yeah.
All right, everybody stay healthy, stay dry today, and have a
Sandy,
good
how are
week.
you
We'll see you
feeling?
tomorrow.
Sandy, how are you
Yes.
feeling following your vaccination?